Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show. My name is Matt Crow. I'm sitting in for Chad. He'll be back next week, and I'll be back here tomorrow with some more guests. But on the line right now from Meta, down the road from Lubbock, is Dan Jackson. And Dan, good morning. How are you?
I'm good, Matt. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Hey, Dan, just for people who haven't heard of you or never been by the gin, tell the listeners a little bit about the gin, how long it's been there, and, of course, your dad and you own and operate it.
Well, we're cooperative. My dad was a co-op gin manager. He managed a gin at it's Texas Star now, just southeast of Lubbock, out west of Slayton. I grew up in it. So I'm a second-generation guy. I came to Meadow in 2002. Was hired by the bunch here to run the gin. I've been here for 17 years. The gin itself, we will turn 85 years old in February. We have a long history in Meadow. We're on the original site. Of course, things have changed a great deal since the producers bought it from the Dallas Gin Company in 1934 and then co-opted it in 35. So we have a nice long history here. We're very proud of that.
And you've had your share of political visitors. I know that from time to time you've had Ted Cruz come through there, checking things out. John Cornyn, and you're kind of a mandatory stop, aren't you, when the politicians come through?
You know, we love the opportunity to have folks come out and see the gin and see our operation and visit with our producers as well. And any opportunity we get, we love to do that. And yes, sir, we're very proud to have Senator Cruz out. I'm working on Cornyn's folks trying to get him here, but hadn't made it yet. Of course, our good friend Dustin Burrows and Senator Perry have both been out, and so we enjoy that. And any opportunity we get, we, again, love to have them.
So give us the 20,000-foot view right now of cotton prices and particular, around here, what's your sense of how cotton farmers are doing?
Well, of course, the weather has been a mixed bag all year long. We started out really well. We had some really deep moisture and got a dryland crop up and going and held a lot of promise. If we'd have got a rain 2 to 3 weeks ago, I'd be looking at a pretty substantial run for us, which would have been in that 50,000 bale range, I feel like. We didn't get it, and so, of course, the dryland's kind of burning up. We've had a lot of heat here the last few weeks especially, and then, again, we had some rain. It's just been so spotty, and we need a good general rain, and it would still help a little bit of the late cotton. It's going to be a little different year than we were hoping. Market-wise, trade is the big talk, of course, in all of industry and agriculture right now. And I read an article by O.A. Cleveland, who is I call him a cotton prognosticator, but he is a very brilliant gentleman, and he is thinking right now, based on what's going on, of course, with trade and other forces in the market, we'll see a 57 to 61 cent trading range this year on cotton, which is not good. It's not good for the producer, not good for the gin. We need a better market.
That's substantial, because I thought back in May the futures prices were a lot higher than that.
Yeah, we were in the 70s, and of course, the trade situation is kind of taking a little of the air out of the market, obviously.
Well, let's talk about that real quick, because I'm interested. We'll get into the details of it for sure, but what is your sense of farmers' views on Trump right now? And I'm not going to put words in your mouth and put you on the spot, but you're there all day long. You see a lot of folks come in and out of there, and it's kind of a gathering place from time to time for farmers and producers, and you've got to hear comments and opinions. What's generally the impression right now of Trump?
I feel like, obviously guys are concerned because we're getting close to harvest. But, Matt, this is the first president, Republican or Democrat, that I can remember since I started paying attention to politics, that we have ever had stand up and say, you know what, these deals aren't fair, and they're certainly not in any way really helpful to the U.S. industry or agriculture, so we're going to rewrite them. And it is not a easy process. I call it heartburn, and we've had quite a bit of it for the last few months. But I still think coming out the other end, it's going to be way better than what we've had. And our producers, while they're concerned, I think they're actually, I won't use the term excited, because it's not been an easy process, but I think it's been nice for them to see that finally we've got a chief executive that recognizes the fact that U.S. industry and agriculture doesn't need to be a main gimme every time we go to the trade table, and the guys are excited because somebody stood up and said, hey, you know what, this isn't right. We keep taking it on the chin via subsidies that other people talk about how U.S. ag is subsidized. Let me just assure your listeners this morning, we are the least subsidized agriculture sector in the free world. China, Pakistan, India, and Brazil do various different forms of subsidies, up to and including paying for all of the fuel and all of the planting seed that these guys use. I mean, it is so lopsided, it's not even funny. So for our chief executive, President Trump, to finally stand up and say, hey, we need to work this over. This needs to be done a little different way. Chairman Conaway, in a conversation I had with him about a year ago, I asked him, I said, when are we going to negotiate for the home team? And his reply is one of the best I've ever heard. He said, not only negotiate for the home team, but make sure that the other side's playing by the same set of rules, and I think that's what we're seeing.
It's interesting you brought up the subsidies, and I heard a lot of this when I worked back east on the Hill, but what people don't realize is you're absolutely right, because our main competitors overseas are subsidized heavily, and I'm not a big fan of subsidies. I'm not. But on the other hand, if we're going to have a level playing field, then heck yeah, we need subsidies. I mean, and I'm not crazy about them, but if you've got Brazil and China and so forth, barking up behind us because of their advantages that their government gives them, then heck yeah, we need subsidies. And I'm no fan of them at all. But on the other hand, like you said, if we're going to get clobbered, then we need a little bit of help. So I'm right there with you, and I don't think a lot of people appreciate that number one, the cotton business is a lot less subsidized than many other things. We don't have to go too far to find examples of that in other states, but like you said, if we would tailor it down if they tailor it down, but they won't, and with fighting with one arm behind our back just doesn't make sense. So I'm with you on that one. You mentioned Brazil. As far as their exports are concerned, are they ahead of us or behind us? Do you know off the top of your head?
I think probably the easiest way to say it is they're kind of right at our heels, and they've taken some of that Chinese market through the tariff negotiation, or the trade negotiations, as it were. But at the end of the day, the Chinese mills will tell you, and everything that I've read, they want U.S. and Australian growths because they know the quality that they're getting. We produce a grade A bale of some of the best quality in the world, cotton-wise, that they can buy, and they like to run that through their mills. I think once we see this trade deal worked out, I think you will see an uptick. I don't know how long it's going to last, but I think you'll see an uptick in Chinese buying, because I think their mills want our cotton. And then things will probably level off again. But if we can get a market back into the mid-70 range, things go much better. And back to our talk on subsidies real quick, I want to throw something in for folks that may not know. And then this is probably a year or so old number, but just it puts it in perspective. U.S. agriculture, not SNAP, not anything else, the actual farm part of the Farm Bill is 45/100ths of the U.S. budget, and for that investment, folks in the United States pay less than 10% of their disposable income for their food and fiber. That's the best deal anywhere in the free world. So when people want to start talking about what our producers get and what our producers do, you might want to pull that out of your back pocket and think about it a little bit, folks, because it makes a difference at the end of the day. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that.
I'm glad you did. We're talking to Dan Jackson, who runs the Meta Co-op gin just south of Lubbock, Texas. And, one thing you touched on was the quality of the cotton that the Chinese want. And I'll just tell a short story, and this won't come as any surprise to you, but I was at a gathering of cotton farmers and ginners and so forth a few years ago, talking about trade policy and ag policy and so on and so forth. And one of the guys who were kind of giving the talk was saying that he'd had complaints from some Chinese mills because the farmers, and of course you're the expert on this, but in the baling process, that some of the, like this yellow string was showing up in the bales, and I don't know where that string comes from, but they were making a big deal about this, and I'm like, of all the millions of tons of cotton, you guys are worried about a little yellow string? But it kind of drives the point home you're talking about, that the quality control is so high in the United States and the machinery is so sophisticated. That's why the Chinese want it, want our cotton. But I always got a kick out of that this little bit of this and a little bit of that in the bales, and the Chinese were getting worked up about it because they didn't want anything, sloppy going into the mills. But I mentioned that story just because you talk about quality control and the Chinese, wanting our cotton because it is the best. I just, that always tickled me that they were all worried about a little piece of yellow string in a bale that was the size of a Buick,
Well, it's funny because you say that, and it's been several years ago. We had an issue. There were people using baler twine that they use for hay bales to hold down module tarps and stuff, and some of that was getting mixed up into cotton. And you wouldn't think about it, but that little strand gets mixed in with that yarn making process, and it contaminates it because they didn't see it, and so it did create some big issues. And so that's a big issue for U.S. cotton. And actually, we're addressing some of that right now. The new John Deere round bales that machinery is kind of taking the country by storm, I guess is the easiest way to say it.
Mm-hmm.
There has been some issues with some plastic contamination, and we're working on it. People that I think I told you earlier, we're coming out here today or from a company, and we're testing some machinery for them and the USDA Gen Lab out of Lubbock to make sure that we catch that it doesn't get to the bale. So U.S. cotton, the industry as a whole, is very quick to step up and try to eliminate any issues that we do have. And so we're getting to do some of that right here in good old Meta, Texas. So we're very proud of that. But anyway, yeah, it's funny because it's the little things. It'll crack you up. I'll tell you one quick story. When I was at Roscoe, we were ginning along one day, and Jenner flags me down. I was actually loading the pad, and he hollered at me, and he said, "Hey," said, "you need to come talk to this guy." And it was one of our hands that was actually watching the module feeder, and he was checking to see how close we were to getting into the next module. And as he stepped back, something flew right in front of his face, and the stripper had picked up an old metal oil bucket. And I bet it weighed like 50 pounds, and it shot out of there. If it had hit him, it could have been very catastrophic for that gentleman. So there's always stuff, whether it's stuff that was left in the field years ago, whatever. It's kind of funny some of the stories that we hear. We found cell phones and modules before. We found tools, all kinds of stuff. It's kind of funny how it goes. But like I said, we try to make sure absolutely that none of that goes any further down the line, but it is kind of funny sometimes what we find. So.
We're talking to Dan Jackson from the Meadow Co-op. And, Dan, if you could just hang on, we're going to go to a break. When we come back, get a little bit more into the crop this year and how cotton farmers plan ahead for moisture or lack of moisture. All right, you're listening to the Chad Hasty Show. We'll be right back after this. Back on the Chad Hasty Show. My name is Matt Crow. On the line with us from Meta is Dan Jackson, who runs the Meta Co-op Gin. And Dan, we were before we went to the break, we were talking a little bit about moisture and lack thereof. I don't know if you caught this on CBS Morning News last week, but there was actually a pretty good piece on development of seeds that are drought resistant. I know that's been in the works for a long time, but they quoted, I think it was Stetson Hogue, about the climate and the rain and so forth. And I want to ask you kind of a tricky question. You've addressed the politics. Now I got another one for you. Climate change. Do you ever hear from producers and farmers that talk about that in any kind of fashion that leads you to believe that, based on their experience, that there is a situation that they're going to have to contend with, and it is climate change, or do they chalk it up to normal drought cycles.
And it was funny, Matt. That was a neat story. Katie Jane Seaton, that is part of the farmhouse vineyards ownership. Her and her husband, and then her sister-in-law and brother-in-law. They actually came out here and filmed the footage you saw. The gin was out here.
Oh, no kidding.
And that was a neat question. I watched that, and it was very interesting to see. I think that actually the anchors on the morning show on CBS were a little bit amazed when she told them what Stetson said, and I think that's the general feeling out here. I don't think that we have seen. I guess you would say we've seen some cycles change, but we've gone through this for years. The drought of the 50s lasted for most of the 50s. That was the one that put my dad out. My dad was a farmer. He'd always worked in the gins when he got through harvesting and stuff. But the drought of the 50s is what really made him decide to go ahead and get into the gin business as a ginner, and then ultimately as a manager. And we've always seen that. I was at Roscoe, and irony of ironies, I was there for 3 years. Great people and great country down there in the rolling plains. But we were in a 3-year drought, and we couldn't buy rain. We never gin more than 15,000 bales, which was tough. And I kid you not, Matt, the day that I started my job up here at Meadow, I stopped by a convenience store there in Roscoe, and one of my directors was there, and it was raining straight down. And he looked at me and he said, "Man, if we'd have known this, we'd have canned your butt."
Right.
And I kind of laughed, but it was funny. That cycle changed down there, and up until probably last year, the year before, they had missed a crop. They've had really great runs, and so it is cyclical, and I think more so that's what we're seeing is just a change in the cycles. I read something this morning that said that the ice flows and the glaciers are at a 35-year high. I mean, as far as size and everything else. So I think we see cycles change definitely, and we have, and I will say this, I have seen it. Used to, it seemed like we got some snow in the fall, and then we got a little bit of snow in the early part of winter, January, February, and we've seen some of that in the last few years. But my recollection in my 50 years is that we don't see quite as many. But then this spring we had a great spring. It was really wet, and we got a little bit of rain. I think it was in July, and then August has been dry, and so far the first few days of September has been dry, and we need rain.
If you want to see that segment that CBS Morning did, go on. Just go to CBS.com and find their morning show archival clips. I think it aired on the 26th. Hey, one other question before we go. We got about a minute left, a little less than that. Hemp growing. What's the buzz down there? Are people actively going to get involved with it? What do you hear?
There's lots of buzz and lots of people talking about it. It would be a great rotational crop to throw into the mix down here with peanuts and cotton, and I think we'll see it.
All right. Well, Dan, thank you. Thanks so much for letting me parachute into your morning. As Dan Jackson from the Meta Gin